Sports Minister Anurag Thakur today has decided to cancel his planned visit to China for the Asian Games. This decision comes after 3 players, wushu players from Arunachal Pradesh, were denied regular Chinese visas to take part in the Asian Games. Delhi has strongly protested against Beijing's denial of accreditation and has asserted that India reserves the right to take suitable measures to safeguard its interests. Now, this incident is not the first time that Beijing has provoked India. Previously, China had issued staple visas to Arunachal Pradesh players. The northeastern Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh is seen by China, viewed by China as its own territory. Will India draw the line for China when it comes to Arunachal Pradesh? I want to go across to our guest, but first, the story so far.
India athlete got already visa for enter in China. China didn't refuse any visa.
All right, so this is the latest chapter of this ongoing diplomatic face-off between India and China. We have the border situation, which hasn't resolved itself. And of course, now there's staple visas for Arunachali players. Again, an issue that dates all the way back to 2007-8. G. Parthasarathy is former Indian High Commissioner. Professor Victor Gao is Vice President with the Center for China and Globalization Chair at the Soochow University. G. Parthasarathy, let me ask you this. I think the first time they gave staple visas to people from Kashmir, people from Arunachal, was all the way back in 2007-8. India has been making noise about it. India has, had diplomatic protestations about it. But really, the Chinese have not changed their policy. They have not changed their tactics. What does India now need to do to draw the line to say that this is unacceptable?
Well, let's face it. We have not responded, and I think we should. For example, I think we should invite, like we did recently, international visitors to Jammu and Kashmir, and they came along and to other areas which are on our borders. I think a concerted effort now has to be made, firstly, to get foreigners, ambassadors and so on, and group tourists to come in large numbers to 2 beautiful tourist havens, Ladakh and Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. Now, therefore, you make the point that it's open to all foreigners. If the Chinese don't want to come, it's their business. That is the point to be made quite clearly to the Chinese. And it should be made pretty public that you may not recognize Arunachal Pradesh, you may not recognize Sikkim, you may not recognize parts of Ladakh, but foreign military attaches, foreign visitors, foreign tourists, and we've taken visitors around Srinagar and Jammu and Kashmir. So I think that is the correct diplomatic response to what the Chinese are doing. The second point is, let's face it, they have been on the offensive militarily every now and then. They made some inroads earlier on, but were completely blocked when they tried it in Arunachal Pradesh last year. So China also knows there are limitations to which they can intrude. But I think we should repeat the exercise we've done, that take a lot of foreigners along, VIPs, to these very states, and they see how beautiful they are. It is a point politically made.
Let me ask Victor Gao, for the last many decades, and this is a big red line for China, India has recognized what you call the One China policy. If China is not willing to recognize the One India policy, which includes Jammu and Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh, then surely at some point, Indian diplomats and Indian diplomacy is going to have a rethink on mouthing this line about, the standard line about One China policy. Maybe India will start giving stapled visas to those folks who are applying from Tibet and Xinjiang and Hong Kong. That should be par for course. I mean, after all, in diplomacy, Professor Gao, as you very well know, it is about reciprocity.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, it is very unfortunate that there is this row between China and India about some participation of Indian players in the Asian Games in Hangzhou and the decision by your sports minister not to participate. It will be a loss for India because the Asian Games is about to open. Lots of heads of states and heads of governments and athletes from more than 50 countries will be there. It will be one of the most splendid Asian Games ever in human history. So I do hope the Indian players going there will be very successful, bring home many medals, gold, silver, and bronze, etc., to make the Indian people very happy. Secondly, allow me to emphasize very quickly, yes, there are territorial disputes between China and India. What you call Arunachal Pradesh is what China called South Tibet. And traditionally, it has been Chinese territory, and the two countries have a dispute over there. Also in the western section in the China-Indian border. Now, how to resolve these territorial disputes requires all the wisdom and care and the long-term vision between the two countries. For India to claim that Arunachal Pradesh is in Indian territory is exactly the same as China claims that that piece of territory is Chinese territory. Traditionally, it is the South Tibet, as we call it. It's inhabited by the Tibetan people, and there are disputes between the two countries. I do
Professor Gao, if you may allow me 30 seconds, do you know the first time in an official Chinese statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the first time they referred to Arunachal Pradesh as Zhangnan or South Tibet was in 2005. It was not in 1959. It was not in 1962. The very first time in an official Chinese foreign ministry document where they claimed all of Arunachal Pradesh, where they said all of Arunachal Pradesh is Zhangnan or South Tibet, was in 2005. The dispute was over. The dispute was over a place called Tawang. That's been there for a number of decades now. But the first time China claimed all of the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh was as recently as 2005.
Then you forgot the reason why there was a border war between China and India back in 1962. Why should the two countries went to war? The
war was for Tawang.
Piece of territory.
The war, which also explains perfectly why the Chinese came in about, what, 10, 15, 20 kilometers in. That's it. They did not come too far in deep the entire state of Arunachal Pradesh. And G. Patsarthi can correct me if I'm wrong on this. Again, I stand by what I said. The first time they claimed all of Arunachal Pradesh was in the 2000s.
No, absolutely not.
G. Patsarthi, thank you.
You forgot.
Absolutely. Listen, absolutely. I was in the army after the 1962 war. I was positioned in the passes, and I'd been to Tawang. Tawang was no Chinese ever crossed it, and that's a fact, and that can't be denied. Look, China believes in what I call as cutting piece by piece in its territorial claims. It keeps increasing with the passage of time. Certainly, in the British days, and even when the Kuomintang was there, and even for the first 15 years of communist rule in China, none of these claims were made.
Yep.
They came later. And in fact, I recall seeing some of the records in the discussions with Premier Zhou Enlai was here. He didn't appear to like what he had done, but he yielded to the wishes of Mao. Zhou was not all that happy about what had happened. So there is, I think, right now, Xi Jinping is a second version of Mao, with excessive ambitions, territorial and otherwise.
Okay.
So I think the important thing is to respect the lines of control we've had. They never crossed the McMahon line before 1962. They were very careful about Ladakh before that. And I think China should also realize that it has been having with us. It has territorial disputes on land. It is trying to seize our land. It has maritime territorial disputes with every neighbor, ranging from South Korea down to Philippines.
Yep.
China has invaded the territory of all its neighbors.
Yeah,
and I think that's a thing my Chinese friends should learn. Visit any one of your neighbors and ask them what they think of you. They'll call you expansion.
So Professor Gao, please respond. What explains then? You know, you look at the map of Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. Look at the countries that China has maritime disputes with: Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia. Surely, you know, the common linkage in all of this is China. It is China that has a problem with all of these countries. In the case of India, yes, there is a historical border dispute with China. And of course, there is the border issue with Pakistan. But other than these two countries, India does not have a border dispute with any other one of its neighbors.
Allow me to respond. Thank you very much. You know for sure that there are 14 land neighboring countries for China. China signed a border treaty with 12 of them. The only two exceptions are India and Bhutan. Now, you mentioned Vietnam. China and Vietnam signed border treaties between each other, solving all the territorial disputes between the two countries. As far as their land border is concerned, there is some maritime territorial disputes between China and India. But keep that in mind. When China came up with the 9 or the 10 dashed line, it was after the Second World War, around 1947. Now, when China took possession of all the islands, reefs, atolls in the South China Sea back in 1945, there was no independent Vietnam. There was no independent the Philippines. There was no independent Malaysia. There was no independent Indonesia. All these countries, now we recognize with due respect, did not even exist. They were ruled by the European and the American colonists. And China was the only sovereign independent country back in 1945, after sacrificing tens of millions of lives in defeating fascist Japan. That's the reason. You just need to do a little bit of history to know, that China's territorial ownership of the isles
to say that the McMahon line was drawn in 1912 or 1915 and we don't recognize it, to say that in 2023, I mean, it's just, I'm really sorry, it's just, it's just tone deaf. I mean, I can't think of, anyone who would say that we can't recognize a line 100 years later because it happened to be not in an independent India or an independent China. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests. But like I said, I think, this issue has been hanging fire for a number of years, this whole business of staple visas. And in diplomacy, it's about reciprocity. If China is not going to give proper visas to people from Arunachal Pradesh, then India should follow suit, reciprocate, and not give stamped visas. Instead, give paper visas to those Chinese who are coming from Tibet or from Xinjiang or from Hong Kong, for that matter. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you again Monday night.